On today's episode of Star Wars Factions Compared, we look at Force users. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Factions Compared. Today we will be examining the Force users of the Empire, Galactic Republic, Rebel Alliance, and Confederacy of Independent Systems. Rather than looking at all Force users, I'm going to pick the best for each faction and compare those. Best will not mean solely most powerful, although obviously that will have an impact, but rather which is the best in the context of leading a faction. Before I get into the video, I just want to mention that on my second channel, I've started a new Star Wars Empire at War series at the request of many of you guys. If you want to check that out, I've put a link in the upper right hand corner. You can also visit the description or the comment section. Anyway, for this video we'll be looking at Emperor Palpatine, Grand Master Yoda as he was during the Clone Wars, Luke Skywalker as he was towards the end of the Galactic Civil War, and Count Dooku after he joined the Separatists. Let's start off with a look at Emperor Palpatine, and as always I will be using Star Wars Legends information in this video. Previously, I've placed Palpatine at number 2 on my list of the most powerful Force users of all time, and I think that that's a relatively reasonable position. The actual physical power he leads is extraordinary, and the things that he can do with the Force, including hiding his presence from thousands of Force users at the peak of the Jedi, is almost unmatched. Palpatine's Force powers directly benefited the Empire in several ways. First and most obviously, he could use his powers offensively. Although we only really see him do so in the Dark Empire series, he's capable of, for example, summoning gigantic force storms capable of annihilating entire fleets. He also uses the Force to control people, predict events, and without his extraordinary power, he never would have risen to the position of Emperor at all. Although later Luke Skywalker would become more powerful than Palpatine, Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi was, in my opinion, not even close. I also believe Palpatine was more powerful than Yoda, which puts him as the most powerful user on this list. The question is then, did Palpatine really use his power in a way that made him an effective leader? I've already talked about things like Force storms, but Palpatine also was an expert in battle meditation. We see at the Battle of Endor that once Palpatine died, the Imperial forces became totally unraveled because of the loss of his influence. He also operated as a sort of divine leader, guiding Imperial policy and direction from afar, while sometimes also taking an interest in more personal matters like the hunt for Luke Skywalker. I don't think we've seen anyone in Star Wars use their power as cunningly or as efficiently as Emperor Palpatine did. He managed to totally dismantle a Republic institution which had stood for thousands of years, putting himself in charge of a new government. However, as always when operating with the dark side, the Force does have somewhat of a corruptive effect on the user. This manifests through flaws found within the Empire, a high degree of cronyism, corruption, xenophobia, aggression and hatred, which in turn fueled rebellion, and at the end of the Galactic Civil War, overconfidence, which ended up with the loss at the Battle of Endor. So while Palpatine does bring a lot to the table from a positive note, he also too has some weaknesses. Let's move now to the Republic and their most powerful Jedi, Grand Master Yoda. Now, Yoda is in sort of a weird position because the Jedi are technically an organization within the Republic, but he still held a lot of influence, as the Jedi did, especially during the Clone Wars. For me, Yoda is sort of a mixed bag. We know that like Sidious, he was extraordinarily powerful. In the Revenge of the Sith novelization, it said that Yoda was the greatest enemy to the dark side that the light had ever produced. However, despite this power, Yoda was an extraordinarily flawed individual, something I think recognized by canon within The Last Jedi. First, despite a suspected re-emergence of the Sith, the Jedi were not able to identify Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis, Tenebris, or countless others as practitioners of the dark side. This is despite the fact that many of them held extremely public offices within the Republic, no more so than Sidious himself. This is especially troublesome given the fact that the Sith had at most 2 members at any time. The Jedi Council, under the leadership of Master Yoda, should have devised a plan to pierce the darkness which was hindering their vision. The Jedi of this era were also far too tied to Jedi doctrine. This resulted most prominently in the turn of Anakin Skywalker to the dark side. The Jedi's refusal to acknowledge natural things like fear and attachment because of the boogeyman, which is the dark side, ended up causing destruction for the entire order. If you remember, Anakin came to Yoda looking for advice because he had fear over the loss of someone that was very important to him. Yoda tells him to ignore his fear, something that realistically for most people just is not possible, especially when it surrounds the death of a loved one. Love, happiness, and connection are supposed to be positive things within the Star Wars universe. I mean, nothing paints that more clearly than the original trilogy. The Jedi, and in part Yoda's ignoring of this in favor of ancient doctrine, caused the Jedi to become completely insular and allowed Sidious to rise to power, plunging the galaxy into darkness. Next we have the Confederacy of Independent Systems and the venerable Count Dooku. Dooku for me is sort of a mixed bag and pretty difficult to judge. He was an extremely powerful Jedi, he rose to the rank of Master within the Jedi ranks, and his departure was a serious blow to the Order. He was very powerful. We see in Episode 2 and Episode 3 that he's capable of at least temporarily fighting off several Jedi at the same time. But he was essentially a puppet. Tyrannus was used by Sidious to make the Confederacy enough of the threat that the clones ordered by Sifo-Dyas would be used by the Republic, and that the Republic would become militarized and eventually transitioned into the Empire. Not much of anything done by the CIS was for any reason other than that. So, although Dooku was technically the head of state and did have a good degree of power, it's not like he was wielding it in a particularly notable way. Again, everything he did was basically at the whim of Sidious. I don't really know what else to say about Dooku. He was a high mid-level Force user. He did have some good leadership skills. I think he was very, very wise. Probably the best thing about him is that he saw the Jedi Order had some serious issues, but then he allowed himself to be manipulated by Palpatine and eventually beheaded. Finally, we have the Rebel Alliance and Luke Skywalker. It's my opinion that by the time of Return of the Jedi, Luke has not reached anywhere near his full power, at least in Star Wars Legends. That being said, he still manages to accompany a lot, and I think that he represents what a Jedi really should be, still bringing forth the virtues of goodness and the light side while not being shackled down by the doctrine of the Jedi Order. I think this is what makes him such a good Force user. He still has attachments but doesn't fall to the dark side. In Return of the Jedi, for example, we see that basically he comes as close as he could to falling but manages to rein it in at the last moment. And of course he uses that attachment and the connection he has with his father to bring Darth Vader back to the light side. Luke's power here is kind of questionable. We see that he defeats Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel when he channels his anger, but on other occasions it doesn't seem like he would be powerful enough to take down, say, Count Dooku. Still, he uses the Force very effectively. He takes down the Death Star, again he turns Darth Vader, he shows extreme bravery when confronting the Emperor, and most importantly he leaves himself open to the Force, and the Force flows and acts through him. With all of that being said, let's now attempt to rank these Force users, and I think that this is going to be very controversial and very difficult. Coming in at number 4 is Yoda, likely the second most powerful Force user on this list, but one who at least during the Clone Wars era is full of flaws. Yoda and the Jedi generally were totally overpowered by the dark side and failed to notice Sidious gaining power. Because of their adherence to Jedi doctrine, they also allowed Anakin Skywalker to turn to the dark side, which would end up with the elimination of the Jedi Order and the Republic, which had both stood for thousands and thousands of years. And again, all of this comes back to the way they use the Force, so I don't think there's any way that you can say that Yoda was the best Force user for his faction. Coming in at number 3 is Darth Tyrannus, Count Dooku. Now, Count Dooku wasn't bad, but to me there's nothing really that makes him stand out, as is the case with Luke and with Sidious. He's more or less a pawn of Palpatine throughout the Clone Wars, and although he does appear to be fairly wise, and he does awaken himself to the errors of the Jedi way, he just doesn't do a whole lot for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Yes, he is their head of state, but ultimately he leads them towards their downfall, a planned downfall at that. Which transitions well into number 2, Palpatine. Palpatine is a real mixed bag. Some of the things he does with the Force, for example, concealing himself in darkness, overthrowing the Republic and creating an incredibly militarized and relatively tight empire, are very impressive. But On the other hand, the way he uses the dark side also brings disadvantage. The Empire is full of issues, including cronyism, corruption, and just general evilness. And in the end, a big part of the Empire's loss at Endor was due to his oversight. Still, you cannot ignore the fact that Sidious was extraordinarily powerful, from using his battle meditation to his force storms to just generally being able to see into the future and plan. Palpatine was extremely useful for the Empire. That brings us to the Rebel Alliance and Luke Skywalker. Before I did this video, I actually thought that Luke would come in at about 4th or maybe 3rd, but then I thought about it. Really, in the Star Wars universe, Luke is everything you want from a Force user, at least in the original trilogy. He's not manipulated or corrupted by the dark side of the Force. He doesn't have the crazy Jedi code holding him back from doing things like forming attachments, and really, he just lets the Force flow through him. Again, yes, he isn't the most powerful, but he makes perhaps the biggest impact, turning Darth Vader to the light side and helping to destroy the Empire. And that's ignoring things like how he rescued Han Solo and destroyed the first Death Star, etc, etc. Luke Skywalker is the true hero of the original trilogy, and I think no one was more useful to their faction than Luke Skywalker was to the Rebel Alliance. That, however, is just my opinion. I know this one's going to be controversial. Take a second to not only vote in the upper right hand corner, but also let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to be one of the first ones here, make sure to turn notifications on. As I said at the beginning, I also just uploaded some more content on my second channel. Subscribe there and check that out if you haven't already. Anyways, until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you.